I give them the data from that I extract from TrainingPeaks and the calculations from how many grams they have oxidized in this stage, or these other riders versus the other one, because I can see that in my monitor as soon as they cross the finish line, right? And then Gorka receives that information and then starts thinking about the menus, already start talking to the chef, who's going to do this, we're going to change this rider is going to have more of this, it's going to have more of that. And then at dinner, he's present there.
Welcome to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. I'm your host, Dirk Friel. In each episode, we'll sit down with industry experts to discuss coaching methodologies, the latest research, and leading tools for endurance training. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources. Welcome to a special Tour de France episode of the CoachCast, where I'm pleased to have as my guest Dr. Iñigo San Millán, who is an internationally renowned applied physiologist and a previous guest on the CoachCast. Dr. San Millán is currently a coach and consultant for the Tour de France team UAE. He has been testing and coaching world-class endurance athletes for over 25 years. In this episode, we dive into all aspects of nutrition for the Tour de France. We chat about how important it is to model ahead of time the demands of each stage, how the race data from TrainingPeaks is analyzed immediately after each stage, and how the data is accounted for within the race day nutrition strategies for each individual athlete. I hope you enjoy this Tour de France sprint episode and learn a few tips that you can apply to your training. Hey, welcome back to the show, the CoachCast. Iñigo San Millán, my longtime old friend. We went to Colorado State University together. We were teammates together decades ago, and he's really made a name for himself in endurance sports and beyond, within health in general. So Iñigo, such an honor to have you back on the show.
Well, thank you very much, Dirk. It's been an honor always to be here. And as you said, we've been friends for forever, for a long time, and happy to continue in the same world of performance together in different roles. But for a long time, it's been fun.
Well, I'm definitely jealous in a lot of ways. You actually get to work with the riders. You coach several of the actual Tour de France athletes on Team UAE. You're part of the performance team for Team UAE, which has the race favorite, Tadej Pogačar. So it's going to be exciting to see if he can pull it off the win in the Tour de France after having won the Giro so convincingly. We'll see if he has more competition. But I would love to talk today about an aspect of the race that's not really talked about a lot, and kind of go into some of the finer details of fueling for the Tour de France, fueling day to day for the Tour de France. And so there's so much around that, and it's such an important part of the performance of the riders. And I believe in the past, it was, decades ago, it was just left up to the rider to eat as much pasta as they could and eat jelly, I guess, little pastries along the way. But it's changed a whole lot in the last few decades. As you prepare for the Tour de France, are you actually modeling out any fueling demands stage by stage, and actually modeling stages ahead of time and those energy demands going into the stage itself?
Yeah, absolutely. We are monitoring as many parameters as possible on the team. This is something we've been doing for a while already. We can see patterns depending on the race and depending on the profile. And then we can make predictions of how that stage is going to be. That being said, a prediction is not usually what always happens in reality. So we still have the ability to change the protocols based on the prediction that we had on the fly. So that's why we might go with plan A for one stage, but we might go then with plan B during that stage, as we see that it might be a transition stage, for example, and we haven't predicted that it's going to be super hard, and all of a sudden it's super hard, which is not usually the case. All right, that being said, we have the ability to adapt and use the mountain stage protocol if necessary.
Okay, so you almost mentioned like the two extremes. You mentioned a transition stage, which assuming is a lower fueling day just because the demands are lower, and then a quote climbing day, which would have the most fueling demands. What is that difference? What are the biggest changes that the athlete needs to account for between those two scenarios?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a main difference is the intensity, although another factor is the duration, right? So you can have so what we look is um, our Bible when it comes to nutrition are carbohydrates, right? This has been transformational, and we can delve into that in more detail later. But so I like a transition stage usually doesn't require as much energy, high intensity energy, so you can really have a lower amount of carbohydrates. Although if that transition stage is very long, you might end up burning or oxidizing as many carbohydrates as to in a short, really hard mountain stage, right? So that's the balance that we look. But normally, you can see that during a typical, let's say 4.5, 5 hour transition stage, sprint stage, you can burn. The riders might burn somewhere, let's say 500 grams total of carbohydrates, whereas in a very hard mountain stage, 4.5, 5 hours long, they might burn a total of about 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 grams. So we're talking about over twice as many grams of carbohydrates, and therefore also many more calories as well.
Right. Okay. So if we start off first thing in the morning, breakfast. These guys wake up, first thing they do is go to breakfast. Let's compare breakfast on a transition day versus a big mountain day. What might be the differences, and what items would they be targeting to consume?
So normally, breakfast is not going to change that much for two reasons. First, because what I said earlier, we don't know what's coming ahead, right? So we don't know, like if let's say there's a 4 hour, for example, it might be a transition stage, but it might turn out to be very hard, right?
Okay.
Or it might be a very hard mountain stage, but maybe it's not as hard as thought, right? So we try not to change elements like breakfast that we cannot predict how things are going to be. So we don't change that much unless obviously it's a prologue day, right, or a like a time trial also, right? But during a regular stage, we don't change much regarding breakfast. The major change is happening, as I mentioned earlier, during the race, the interventions, and also after the race. So we can calculate the amount of carbohydrates and fats that an athlete is oxidizing, is burning. It's something I've been doing since 2005. Looking at fat and carbohydrate oxidation rates in the laboratory, and then you can calculate how much carbohydrates an athlete can be burning. And then with that, we can then intervene after the race. So we pull the data out of TrainingPeaks, and with that data, we can very precisely in an indirect way, we can see as precise as possible, but it's still indirect way, right? We don't do a direct calorimetry, but we can see quite well how many grams of carbohydrate and fat and how many calories an athlete has oxidized, has burned during that stage. And therefore, that's when at dinner time we can make intervention. Not only that, even at the bus already, we can already start intervening. And in many areas, many times, the bus is very important because you might have a 2 or 3 hour transfer to the to the hotel. And so you don't want to starve the riders until they arrive to the hotel. So the meal, post race meal in the bus is very important, as well as dinner. So this is why pulling the data out of TrainingPeaks, we ASAP within 5 minutes or 10 minutes, we have the calculations of the needs, the nutritional needs for an athlete for the cyclist after the race, and then we can intervene both for post race meal as well as for dinner.
Okay, I'm going to dive into that more, but sticking with breakfast, we're going to get off that here soon. But the breakfast the first week is the same as breakfast the third week. primarily, right? Is that what I heard? It's
Yeah,
not like they're
yeah.
ramping up over the course of 3 weeks the amount they eat
No,
at breakfast. Okay.
no,
So now
exactly. Normally, sorry.
so now as we are preparing for the race, they're on the bus. What kind of pre-race regimes might they go through? They've had breakfast maybe. How many hours prior to the race have they had breakfast? And some of the stages start later, obviously, so they may have had 2 meals, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, normally, yeah, races they might start around noon, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So breakfast is usually around 9.
Okay.
So we have about 3 hours before the race starts. But yeah, that the hour before the race, that the riders might already start having some gels or some. Mainly, we don't go much for gels or like a very simple carbohydrates. We might go for more for like these little sandwiches that we might make,
Okay.
right? Or little pastries, that we might make. Like you were speaking earlier about traditional, right,
Yeah.
nutrition. That's a little bit more of what we use in this setting, right? Because we don't. I mean, for 21 days having gels and
Yeah.
bars and drinks, it's unbearable,
Right.
right? So it's good to have especially before the race when you don't have the rush of swallowing something fast, right? And getting the energy right away through a gel, for example, right? So yeah, you can have but you need to start eating something. You can have a ham and cheese or jam and cream cheese, a little sandwich, right?
Mm-hmm.
The rounded ones, very
Yeah.
typical European ones. So we can have those. So things like that, right? So yeah, and that's when the race starts, and then with the clock for nutrition starts for each rider. We have different depending on the race. We give instruction to our riders about the grams per hour of
Okay.
carbohydrates they need to take, and there we educate them very well, so they're really counting carbohydrates really well. It's
Mm.
an exercise of education that we do, and in fact, they do it so well. Then, as soon as they cross the finish line, they can memorize everything they had, and we can get
Are
up to.
they recounting that to somebody so that it's being recorded?
Yes.
Okay.
So our team nutritionist Gorka Prieto is the one in charge of organizing
Okay.
uh, every aspect relating to the post race meal, the grams per hour, and yeah, we interact really well. I give them the data from that I extract from TrainingPeaks and the calculations from how many grams they have oxidized in this stage, or these other riders versus the other one, because
Mm-hmm.
I can see that in my monitor as soon as they cross the finish line, right? And then Gorka receives that information and then starts thinking about the menus. Already start talking to the chef. Who's
Okay.
going to do this? We're going to change this. This rider is going to have more of this. This rider have more of that. And then at dinner, he's present there. But yeah, we calculate things quite well, and it's really cool to work with someone like Gorka and in a such an organized way where yeah, we interact quite well, and obviously with the riders being so cooperative because again they're incredibly well trained. We've done a big effort for that. I think this is a huge achievement, I would say, that we had on the team in the performance department, educating riders about nutrition and educating them about the meaning of nutrition, the why, and the need for counting what they're having, so they can first know more themselves about the needs, and second, obviously, to give us the feedback so we can then adjust nutrition.
Right. Okay. So the rider finishes, they'll recount to the dietitian what they consumed during the race. At the same time, you are calculating on your end, given the data coming from TrainingPeaks. You're then reporting back to the nutritionist each individual's, I guess, amount they need to try and make up that evening. And then that nutritionist is actually going to each rider and giving them the tips for what to consume at dinner. Is that right?
Yes, and this is to me it's been an important advancement that we have made, because normally until recently the riders they cross the finish line, but they don't know exactly if how many grams of carbohydrate or fat they have burned during the stage. It could be 500, it could be 700, it could be 1,000, right? So if the protocols, they used to be standard back in the days, right? You enter the bus and you had the same nutrition for all of them. It doesn't matter if you're the first one, if you're the last one. And it doesn't matter if it's a transition stage or if it's a very hard mountain stage. And then at dinner time, they usually are quite standard, right? Within the nice work that all teams have done, like hiring chefs, where they make these beautiful dishes. It's not just rice and chicken or pasta and chicken, right? It's now very special tortellini with whatever, and the chicken is marinated with something, right? But now we're taking to the next level where we can identify if a rider has burned 500 grams versus another one who has burned 800 or 1,000. It's not the same, the one who's been in the break the whole day versus the one who has been always in the front and also at the end in the front, or versus the one who was always in the front in the first part of the race, and then he's been in the bus, the cycling bus, right?
Yeah,
the peloton. Right. So that's what we can calculate, because if you have the standardized nutrition for everybody, then you're going to see what we've been seeing for years. Some riders gain weight, other riders lose weight, and it was not rare to see riders losing 2-3 kilos, right? During
so what ideally, what are you looking for when they finish a tour? Are they losing, maintaining? What are you seeing, or what would you like to see?
We're maintaining it. We're within 0.2 0.3 kilos, which is like, wow. When we started to look at that data, looking at how well they maintain the weight, we couldn't believe it at first, right? Because or historically, right, we were used to see riders losing 2 or 3 kilos because they were catabolic. They needed to eat more, but they didn't do it, right? Because they maybe have the tools to know, or we didn't have the tools to know, right? Or maybe the other way around. They say, "Okay, I have to eat more just in case," and they end up gaining 2-3 kilos, right? So now, we are trying to really avoid that catabolic state, which is key. Yep. And because in the moment a cyclist in the Tour de France enters a catabolic state, it's game over. You start losing more muscle weight, muscle mass. Also, you get into a point also where you cannot store glycogen properly. So you might increase carbohydrates, but you cannot store them completely because you have muscle damage.
Right.
And when you have muscle damage, you can't store glycogen properly. So you might store it into fat or retain liquid also, because it's associated to glycogen that hasn't been stored intracellularly in the muscles. And this is why, it's just trying to avoid that catabolic state is absolutely key from day one. And this is why we're very, very focused on that. And we've been able to maintain the weight of our riders, especially in the last 4 years, where we have been dialing things in quite well.
Okay, so then what about preparing for the race in training? And this is something that amateurs can possibly learn a thing or two from. How do you work this protocol into their training? Are there certain days of the week where they're practicing that actual race day nutrition and on the bike nutrition, so it becomes familiar to them?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. And this is something that we do that with our cyclists, and that I highly recommend it also to the rest of cyclists of any level, from amateur level to recreational, right? So to professional. So we what we do is, like, there are two things. First of all, not every training day is the same. Some days you do more intervals, and that's very glycolytic. So you utilize a lot of glycogen. And other days are not as glycolytic, are more like zone 2. Where you might use more fat, but you also use glycogen because you also use glucose. And if the day is long day, you have to be careful, right? But other days, and the second point is, like, other days, you really need to push. If you need to have a high carbohydrate diet for a given race, you need to train your gut. right? So you need to do like and train the foods that you eat, right? You can never try a new food or a new gel or a new drink the day off, right? You need to try it, as we all know before. But also, it's like if you're shooting for, let's say, 100 grams per hour of carbohydrates and you're not used to it, you need to push for that. So there might be days where you need to train your gut to do that. But again, it depends on your level, right? We push a lot of carbohydrates, a lot for our cyclists. But obviously, we're talking about the Tour de France, right? Where they burn, they burn like just in carbohydrates. They can burn up to 4,000 calories just in carbohydrates, right? So and out of those, it's just they might eat about 80-70% is pure sugar. So obviously, you don't want to do that with recreational athletes because that's not good for them.
Yeah, and also you have to talk about the workload that's being done. So the Tour de France level, they're pushing a lot of kilojoules per hour. Therefore, the fueling demand is very, very high. A lot of people are talking about 100 plus grams per hour, but that's not necessary for every rider. If you are a light rider, you weigh 125 pounds and you're doing 500 kilojoules an hour, you don't need 120 grams of carbohydrates an hour, right? Correct? It's not just one target for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why we try to individualize as much as possible. And we give usually ranges of 20 grams per hour up or down of carbohydrates, right? So as you said, a light rider might be needing, depends on the states, 80 grams per hour, but a heavier rider, because they need to develop, or they develop more power output, they might need 100. But also that light rider is the one that maybe is the one that's like the last 2 climbs full gas, which is very high glycolytic effort. So the amount of glucose is super, and then might even have more carbohydrates that day. They might need more carbohydrates that day than the big guy, right? So that's what we
because the big guy might get dropped on the first climb, but the light rider needs to be there in the 5th hour, and so they need to preload before that final hour.
Exactly. And this is why, increasing carbohydrates to pushing carbohydrates as we're pushing now with cyclists, it has been transformational for performance. They push a lot of carbohydrates, and because the ability of humans to exercise depends on the ability to transform chemical energy into mechanical energy, right? The mechanical energy is that power output, whether you call it watts or you call it kilojoules, right? But that starts with the chemical energy and entering the muscle, and that's your substrates, and that's your fats, your carbohydrates, and your protein. And we know that the fastest gasoline that you need to, or that you have to transform it into ATP, which is the chemical energy, is carbohydrates, is glucose. So this is why it's very important to have a push carbohydrates very high amounts when you're competing at that level. At a recreational level, you don't need it, but at that level, it's really, really high. I started recommending, and this is how it has changed. I started recommending 80 to 100 grams per hour in 2005, 2006 already, and already doing it. And people were laughing at me and just thinking, this guy's crazy. This is impossible. Now the guidelines are already talking about 90 grams per hour. That being said, like as most of guidelines in sports performance and nutrition and in many other areas, guidelines are usually a good decade behind, and already we're pushing way more than 90 grams per hour right now. Now they're really publishing and going to conferences. Many of the people who are criticizing me going to conference say, no, you need 90. Like, well, we have passed 90 a long time ago. We push way more than that. So, but what I'm saying of this, because back in the days, the guidelines were 30 to 55 or 40 to 60 grams per hour. If you at the Tour de France now go with a nutritional plan of 40 to 60 grams an hour, you're going to bunk big time. You're going to die, and,
Right.
and you're going to get catabolic, and that's when you lose those 60. I mean, those 3 kilos during the tour, because you get catabolic. So yeah, it's very important.
Do the riders ever get nauseous? I mean, amateurs and especially triathletes, you talk about the Ironman, nausea, and I couldn't consume anymore because of my stomach. Is that just gone because they've trained it so well, or does that ever happen to any of the tour riders?
Well, I mean, it happens a lot less. That's where we before going to the Tour de France with the nutrition plan, we have trained that. We have trained that, especially at training camps. We do like a 3-week training camp before the tour at altitude. Then we go to either Dauphiné or to the Swiss, and we go back to altitude. So it's a long time, coexisting with us, and this is why we really take a lot of detail into everything that we do nutritionally and physiologically and training wise. But the thing is that it is very important the type of carbohydrates that you have and the timing, right? And the combination of how you do that. This is why you need to train, you need to combine things and also individualize it, because some riders, this specific drink or this concentration doesn't sit well on the stomach no matter what. So you need to change the concentration, and then you have to make it after maybe an extra gel, which might tolerate well, or maybe a panini, or like one of those pastries. I mean, you have to really push those carbohydrates, but you need to individualize it. But it's rare now that those famous diarrheas or bloated stomach. They're very rare nowadays. Whereas back in the days, they used to be quite normal, right?
One thing we haven't talked about is actually in the bus, and you mentioned sometimes there's 2-3 hour transfers. That's a big part of recovery, and we're seeing these riders they cross finish line, and they're getting, I believe, tart cherry juice. Is that what I'm seeing? The dark juice that they're slamming immediately?
Yeah, they're doing that. I mean, it's rich in antioxidants, right? And also has glucose and a good source of carbohydrates. And it's also
Fructose?
it has a different taste, right? Than your typical sports drink. And sure, I'm not saying necessarily it's a trend, but now if one team does it, boom, everybody goes for it, or the riders demand it. And, I want that. Okay, sure. At the end of the day, I mean, it doesn't change much whether you give them that cherry juice, with higher antioxidants,
Or a Coke.
because we also give antioxidant. Well, it depends. But sometimes, the riders say, look, I don't want that stuff. I want a Coke or a Fanta, period, And it is that right away, right? Then when we get to the bus, we start doing a more specific protocol.
What might they eat on the bus?
I'm sorry?
What might they eat on the bus in a 2-hour transfer?
So, for example, like they might eat already a big bowl of rice, or a big bowl of pasta, combined with either an omelette or some chicken. We give them already. And so, we get a big meal after that for some of the
So
guys.
it's not all carbohydrates. You're working in some protein and fat.
Oh, yeah. And you need protein. You need to start using, building protein again, because you also use protein during the race and riders. So this is a fun fact. So bodybuilders, right? They usually have 2 to 2.5 grams per kilogram per day of protein.
A protein, okay.
Protein, right? Which is obviously you think, oh, they're big, right? They need a lot of muscle and they need a lot of protein. But endurance riders, endurance athletes like cyclists or triathletes, they utilize as much or even more protein than a bodybuilder.
Wow.
Over the course of the day. So the protein intake of a Tour de France cyclist is at least that of a bodybuilder.
So what did you say, 2.5?
Yes, 2 to 2.5 or even more grams per kilogram, which again, like people saying that back in the days that 100 grams per hour or 80 was impossible. Yeah. They also said, right, oh no, because the guidelines were about 1 to 1.3 grams of per kilogram per day of protein. And if you had more than that, it's going to cause kidney damage and you're going to end up in the hospital and things like that. Now we're doubling, right? Not just the amount of carbohydrates, but we're doubling the amount of protein.
Wow.
And there's no kidney damage for sure, right?
Yeah,
and
but helping maintain that muscle health.
Absolutely, because they're entering a catabolic state it's quite important. So yeah, we start doing that right away after the cross the finish line. Yeah, in terms of like meals, as well as obviously you need to supplement it with shakes, with protein shakes. It's very difficult to get the amount of protein, those 2 to 2.5 grams per kilogram per day, just with steaks. I mean, you could do it, but you have to, every day would be like a Asterix.
Long time to
meal,
and
right?
your sleep could affect your sleep.
Yes, exactly. And it could affect your sleep. And so yeah, you don't want to do that. So yeah, you need to have obviously natural meat, and this is why also we have our chefs like the rest of the teams, right? They buy the best produce, they buy the best meat, the highest quality, the leanest one. They buy in person instead of maybe getting that from the hotel. They buy in person, they cook them in person, grilled. So
and they have their own kitchen on wheels, right?
Exactly. It's really, really a big display now. Every team has a kitchen and wheels following the riders. And other teams, they even have like a huge bus truck that they have the kitchen, and then they have the living room where
dining
eat.
room.
Dining room. Dining room where they eat.
They have a chandelier and
yeah, it's really fancy. We don't have that. We don't have that yet, but maybe someday.
All right. That's awesome. Well, Iñigo, thanks so much. I think there's some stuff in there that people can actually use at home for, the amateur age group athlete can definitely learn some stuff from this conversation for sure. You're at the extreme level of fueling, and so there's a lot to be learned from there, as you've done with a lot of your education work, trying to relate elite pro athletes down to making everybody healthy. So I appreciate all the insights, and good luck in the rest of the tour.
Well, thank you very much, Dirk. As always, a pleasure to be in your podcast. And if anything that I said has been helpful for listeners, that'll make me very happy.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources.